Greetings, everyone. DFG here, guys. Hey, I want to take a few minutes today and just do a little historical, um, educational information to you all, those who are part of my listening audience, who I appreciate very much. But I saw some interesting information just recently. I was walking down the Mississippi River in the city of New Orleans, and there was a sign that was a landmark sign, and it posted some information around the transatlantic slave trade. And I thought it was very interesting because for many of us, we were taught in our history classes, in our history of misinformation classes here in America, in the public school, private school system, that millions and millions of slaves were imported uh, into the United States, from Africa. And it was, and I I've now have learned to not only dispute that narrative, but to reject that narrative because it's a false narrative. It's a lie. Were slaves brought to the United States? Yeah, from Africa. Yeah. But let me give you some facts here. If I ask you this question, what was the number one slave port state? In the Americas. Some of you guys would probably say, I don't know, maybe some would say Massachusetts. I know many of you guys would say South Carolina. Some would probably say Louisiana. Because all of those were in Rhode Island too as well. They were definitely, according to history, uh, slave port, states. Or at least there were cities in those states that were slave ports. But that sign was representative of here in Louisiana, in particular again New Orleans. And I'm going to share that with you in a moment. Then I'm going to share some additional information with you via video. It's going to be a short one, just to give you some additional insight as we continue to dispute this narrative. Who are the Africans that are here in America? Which as was formerly known as Turtle Island. Okay, and so I'm going to start here. So let's go back to the question that I asked you just a moment ago. The number one slave porting state, a slave port state in the Americas, and let's say, here we go. All right. The number one slave port state here in America just so happens to be, come on, drum roll for me, somebody. Somebody give me a drum roll. All right? Drum roll. What if I told you Brazil? Yeah, Brazil. 900,000 slaves were imported into Brazil in the Americas. But if you look over at what about North America? Well, let's see here. Let's go back to the sign that I mentioned to you before. I'm going to show you this. You can see this. Hopefully you can. Let's see that. Now I want you to notice, if you can read it, write down, let me see, line 1, line 2, line 3, line 4, line 5, line 6, right? Look at line 6, transatlantic slave. Let's see, go look closer. Transatlantic slave. Wow, you saw my lighting just went weird on me here. Sorry, guys. Let's go back again. Let's try this again. The transatlantic slave enslavement through what? French, Spain, and the Americas rule, approximately what? Look at that number down here. Let me go over here for you. 12,000 descendants, right? You see that? 12,000 descendants. Let me see if I can put my hand on here for you. I'm going to make it bigger. There you go. Can't miss it this way. You see that number? 12,000. Men, women, and you would see children. So if it was 12,000 that came here, can anybody explain to me where the 20 million slaves came from, in, I guess, approximately, because this started right here at 1719, and they're saying that less than 100 years, because the slave trade supposedly stopped in 1808, right? So in less than 100 years, it went from 12,000 in Louisiana. Probably wasn't much different, because if you think about it, these ports are not going to pass up Louisiana when you can come right through that particular Caribbean Sea and the wind coming up into those coasts, like the hurricanes come, right? They're not going to pass those easy currents up to go to South Carolina and North Carolina without coming to Louisiana. Not saying that the slave trade did not go as far as, again, Rhode Island and Massachusetts, but surely they would have taken the most convenient route. So if only 12,000 came here, then you know that the number probably going in the Carolinas or going up into New England probably wasn't much more than that, if that. But let me give you some additional information to go along with that. When you look at, the slave trade or who was here. So if the slaves that were brought to Louisiana, let's stay right there, were only 12,000, right? That populated Louisiana, and I'm sure Mississippi and Alabama. Then where did the rest of those slaves come from? Where did they come from? I'll tell you this much. If you look at the way they dress, let's just look at their attire. I think it's in 1 Peter, I want to say chapter maybe 3 or 4. It says, it tells us to be modest, especially our women. It tells, the Hebrew Israelite woman to dress modestly, not, extravagantly, don't allow the braiding of your hair and your jewelry, your gold, your beads, to trump your spirituality. That's what it talks about. You can Google that up, for more information. Just Google up, not the braiding of hair. So who braids their hair more than any other ethnic group? Now we see some of the other ethnic groups copying our style, the style of our women in terms of braiding their hair. But our women have always braided their hair. Why? Because they are the women that Peter was talking about. It went in the books that he wrote inside of our history book along the lines of how should they dress themselves. Let's go a little bit farther. If you notice, go back, and I want you to Google this up for yourself, because sometimes, seeing is, as they say, seeing is believing, but sometimes we have eyes to see, but we can't see. Go back and Google up so-called, well, I'm not going to, the enslaved women. They weren't so-called, they were enslaved. Our people were enslaved. Oh, and by the way, you're probably already catching where I'm going with this. Those Africans who came here, yeah, they supplemented the slaves who were already here, or the enslaved that was already here. The Native Americans, so-called Native Americans, the tribes, the Indian tribes. They weren't Indian tribes. The Indian name came from dumbass Europeans who didn't know the difference between India and North America. They were really the 12 tribes of Israel, mainly 2, Judah, and most likely, I want to say Judah, and maybe it was, I want to say Benjamin was the second one that was here. But there were more, they confused themselves because they didn't know where they were going. But when they came here, they saw the tribes that were here. You follow me? And they saw the way they were dressed. Our women even had their hair covered. That's what I want you to go Google. Go Google up old slave narratives or old slave pictures and look at what our women have on. All of their heads are covered. And some of you guys are going to say, well, that's because they were working out in the cotton fields. Hey, they had their heads covered in the houses too. Those who worked in the kitchens. Those who raised their children. And I can go on, et cetera, because it was always a part of our culture. Our women were instructed through the law of Moses that they had to have their heads, covered. Our men, beards, they were instructed, to wear a certain type of apparel with fringes along the bottom. If you go back and look at so-called Indian pictures of the men, look at what they have on. Look at the fringes that are on the garments that they're wearing. Look at the women, the fringes that are on the garments that they're wearing. And then go back to Leviticus and see that we are supposed to wear garments with fringes on them. Although many of us, through indoctrination, long ago stopped wearing it. And some of us, who are trying to catch back up to who we were supposed to be, in essence, come back into our right minds, we're attempting to get there. And then there are many of us who have already arrived. And you can go through YouTube and see some of those men, some of those women who have come back, to their original roots, the roots of the Hebrew Israelite, male and female. And I'm not necessarily talking about the street corner, preachers. I'm talking about those of us who are the people, whether we practice the laws or not, does not deny who you are. Okay? So those who are probably the most spiritual among us have already come back to the attire aspects of it. But those of us who are still growing, in our knowledge, then, we still have some work to do around, the attire and how we are supposed to present ourselves, but it does not deny who we are. Now, one other thing that I want to share with you guys as well, and that is, excuse me, I want to share this video with you real quick. We have been challenged time and time again. What did the so-called Negro contribute to America? And this falls back into reparation conversation. You guys are all this is the narrative we hear all the time. You guys are always looking for something for nothing. We don't owe you anything because we did not benefit from your slavery. If that had something to do with our ancestors, and we have no knowledge of that. So I want you guys who are watching this video, I want you to share this video around to your friends, maybe some of them who are European, Caucasians, or Mexican, or Hispanic, whatever they might be, who claim that somehow we have no right, for restitution, for the toll and all the strife that our ancestors and us, we the people, and our children are still dealing with. And I can get into mass incarceration and all of that, but I don't have enough time for that. And I got to get into this video. I probably have lost, looking at my clock here, I've lost a lot of valuable time already. But I'm going to show you this, and now I'm going to let this video end on its own for you, okay, guys? Probably show you a couple of minutes. And I'm going to come back with you with more narrative, but I wanted to get this out. So there'll be a part 2, so please look for it, okay? But here's part 1, and I'm going to continue this video, today. So look out for part 2, because I really want to break this video down for you, okay? Here you go. Check this out.
People were addicted to cotton. Cotton was the crop that would bring you great wealth.
Particularly in the state of Mississippi, you have a state that enters the Union in the 19th century, in 1817. And by the start of the Civil War, it's the richest one in the country, in the entire Union. There are more millionaires per region than any other place in the United States. So Mississippi is a place where people know you can get land for cheap, but you can also participate in a market that allows your wealth to grow.
The majority of the wealth in Mississippi was controlled by a small group of people, the wealthy plantation owners, often called the planter elite.
The fortunes of this planter aristocracy were largely amassed by slave labor, slaves who worked the fields and grew the cotton. These rich plantation owners were dependent on slaves for their wealth and their power.
Throughout history, the powerful have dominated the meek. 100 years before the birth of the United States, wealthy British colonists purchased slaves to work on vast colonial plantations. But during the Revolutionary War, many American settlers, in their fight for freedom, grew less tolerant of the practice. A few American colonies took steps to outlaw slavery, and shortly after the American Revolution, the newly formed United States banned the importation of slaves.
By the late 18th century, slavery was on the decline, but with the invention of the cotton gin, it changes everything. Cotton became king. And what happened was a transformation of this western frontier. People are moving here in droves. Slaves are being moved from the upper South, Virginia, North Carolina, Maryland, South Carolina, and they're being moved downward. And literally the complexion of Mississippi changes and becomes the blackest state of the Union.
By 1860, Mississippi's enslaved outnumbered its citizens who were free.
Varied geographically. In some parts of the state, piney woods in southeast Mississippi, the hill country of northeast Mississippi, there were very few slaves and slaveholders. In other counties, the counties of southwest Mississippi, the Natchez District, the vast majority of people were slaveholders.
You have a state that has a huge population of enslaved people, and that's one of the enduring legacies, in fact, to this day, that Mississippi is the only state that has a black population of almost 40%. This comes directly because of the popularity of cotton and also the success of this cotton crop.
Most of the slaves in Mississippi would have been employed on cotton plantations.